Hi there, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're from Electric Theatre Collective. We do commercials, episodic film, and music promos. We were founded in 2011, and we've recently moved to brand new studios in Brick Lane. When I say recently, I mean literally last week. So we're just settling in there. It's a really nice new space in East London. I'm going to kick off by just playing you our reel, just to give you a flavour of what we do, and then take it away. So just quick introductions. I'm Simon, I'm Head of VFX.
I'm Dan, I'm a CG lead, stroke Houdini TD. Been with ETC almost 3 years now.
And we're going to talk to you today about a project called Accenture Changing Tree, which we're delighted to say has been picking up a few awards recently on the kind of awards circuit. It's a job we did with director Sam Brown, who we've collaborated with on a number of high-profile jobs previously, and he's a real joy to work with, and was on this one. Broadly speaking, it's about a tree that legend has it can actually walk. I'll kind of stop there and then play it, and then we'll go into that a bit more.
The walking tree is said to change its entire location in pursuit of sunlight. Where could reinvention take your business? Accenture, let there be change.
Just a sort of loose overview of this talk, I'm going to sort of talk first a little bit about some of the creative challenges of working out how the job worked and how we did the shoot and stuff like that. And then kind of at half-time, I'll switch over to Dan, who's going to deep dive into some of the sort of Houdini technical side of things. So here's just a quick overview of the boards. This is a job that we were sort of, from the beginning of its inception, we were sort of considering it to be a big effects job with kind of a procedurally generated tree and roots and ground interaction. and there were boards on, there were shots in the boards of close-ups of soil churning and thousands of insects being unearthed and kind of new roots growing with little tendrils coming off them and all this sort of stuff. And it felt very much like that was the focus of the job. But also the boards, particularly these boards, because these are developed boards. Early on, there were far fewer animals, but the animals in this spot were only really ever meant to be incidental little cutaways to show reactions, to add some emotion, and were intended to be in camera or stock. Pretty much all of them. The only CG creature allowed for in our quote was the butterfly and some crowd system for the bugs. But however, as is often the case, the boards developed and the kind of creative intent developed, and they were never really going to be able to find the right creatures and put them on location or in a studio or get the right performance. So in the end, every creature became CG, which obviously is a big pivot from what we were planning to do. But ultimately, animators really want to be doing this sort of stuff. And this. You have to watch this a couple of times before you notice he's actually got 3 arms there. There's someone else hiding just behind him, being the leaf, being the branch. There's some lovely creatures in this job, lovely creature job project. But for this talk, we're going to focus more on the unusual aspects of this job because there's been a lot of talks about kind of grooming furry creatures. So we're going to focus on the tree and the time-lapse considerations and time-lapse effects. And I guess to start off, we should talk about the tree and what it is. It's this thing called, with a hard to pronounce Latin name, but affectionately called the walking palm. It's a tree native to parts of South America. It's believed to actually move very, very slowly. The narrative of the ad was to show how it makes the journey to find better conditions, sunnier spots, like better soil, whatever else trees like. And the director really loved the feeling of the motion in this middle image, which it was almost like someone had just spun around with their iPhone and caught a spontaneous snap of a tree as it was scurrying off into the undergrowth. And so we started with a ton of research, and obviously, probably goes without saying that the first thing is that this tree moves really, really slowly. It doesn't scurry, and some suggest it's a myth that it even moves at all. And the sort of estimates you read online range from a few meters a year to a few meters a decade. So it's fair to say it's never been filmed, not even in time-lapse. Finding research of how it's going to move is pretty hard. So how does it move, or how do we imagine that it might move? So we started by doing hand-drawn stop frame animation cycles, and we sort of had to imagine the mechanism by which it moved based on the small bits of information we'd read and the photos we'd looked at, and we sort of assumed that maybe it grows new roots in the direction of travel, and the old roots must kind of reach the end of life and wither off and die, shriveling up or just falling off and being left on the forest floor. So that's it, sort of translated into 3D animation, and we were starting to try and understand the requirements of the shot as the kind of edit developed, and this is pre-shoot, by the way, and it became clear that we should start treating the tree a bit more like an animated creature than a complete effects element, because we could give animators creative control over timing and poses, which obviously gives us the greatest opportunity for sort of revisions and following the director's brief and stuff like that. And use the effects team to focus their energy on adding procedural effects such as aging, moss growth, thorns. And this is all in addition to the numerous other effects tasks on the job, which we're not going to have time to cover in this talk. But that included things like soil and ground, leaf disturbance, spider web creation. It was all procedural. And the simulation of that and dew effects on that and all the creature sea effects and stuff like that. But going back to the tree, we also developed tools to enable arbitrary placement of the roots that could be smoothly filleted into the main trunk. And these, as we were starting to develop this, these early motion tests gave us much better understanding of what we were going to have to capture on set, because this is all pre-shoot tests. And we kind of really needed to know before we went on set how far the tree might travel in a shot and how it might interact with the ground. So we understood its motion before we captured the plates and made appropriate framings and camera moves and pans on set. So it turned out we were going to shoot in the Brazilian rainforest, which I was excited and a little nervous about. A friend who's a documentary filmmaker had relayed some stories of boating down the Amazon, leaving his tent in the middle of the night for the call of nature and finding the floor so thick with creepy crawlies that he couldn't even see the ground, and the air so thick with mosquitoes that he could scoop them out of the air with his hands. So I was bracing myself for this sort of thing. And I sort of rushed off and built my jungle survival kit, mosquito-proof trousers, mosquito net hat, copious amounts of jungle formula, and all the jabs. But let's be real, this is not a documentary, this is commercials. And when I arrived at the accommodation, I started to realize I might have slightly overdone it. And the jungle, the location, there were 2 locations, and they were actually national parks. They were about 30-40 minutes drive from central Rio. And they're kind of the Brazilian equivalent of shooting in Epping Forest or the Surrey Hills. And there was an entrance, roads, footpaths, signs, and the dress code was jungle casual. So yeah, time-lapse photography, this is the first thing we had to consider. How's this going to work? We need to do some tests, right? So in a cold day in early January, I took the camera up to local woods and sat for the whole day with the camera on a tripod and a packed lunch. Is it playing? No, it's not playing. There you go. And I kind of did interval tests because what we really needed to know before we went on the shoot was how long do we need to shoot each shot? Do we need a year to make the ad? We had 3 shoot days, so that wasn't going to work. And the results of this test were that on a cloudy day where there's not much light movement, it doesn't really matter what your interval is. It pretty much always looks the same. So that was really good news because it meant we could shoot as fast as possible and move on, get multiple takes potentially, and get more shots in a day. But ultimately, we're not time-lapse specialists. It's one thing putting a camera on a tripod and hitting go. It's another thing to orchestrate controlled camera moves and make it reliably repeatable. And we need gear like this. So there's motion sliders and camera control, motion control things that have repeatable heads and that sort of stuff, and that's not really our bag as VFX soups. So it was time to bring in the professionals. We got in touch with a guy called Tim Shepherd and one of his team, Todd Cooley, who had worked on stuff like this. So they knew what they were doing with the camera. And that was a big relief for us. We offloaded that side of things to people who knew what they were doing. So we didn't actually have to shoot it, but we still had to figure out what this meant for VFX. And stills photos, Lexa footage normally has 13 stops of dynamic range, raw stills of maybe 8 to 9, and about 1 or 2 stops of latitude of shadow and highlight recovery. How do we get more range? Exposure bracketing is obviously the answer. So for every setup, it was shooting every 10 seconds or whatever our final interval was, but it was going shooting 3 shots each time. And the result of that, obviously, is an image sequence. I should probably give an epilepsy warning at this point. If anyone has a problem with that, they should look away, because it gives you this kind of thing. But obviously, if you're just checking what you've got, you just take the middle exposure, turn that into a MOV quickly just to check your result, and you get something pretty nice. But obviously, this whole workflow was very alien to the normal way of shooting things, where there's like real-time playback. You can do take after take after take. Each of these takes took 45 minutes to an hour, and you kind of only got what you got. And we did a few shots 2, maybe 3 times, but that was it. So we were low on takes. And then when it came to wrangling the data, none of the editorial packages read this stuff, so we had to write tools that batch converted raw stills into EXRs. There's no time code; it all had to be eye-matched. Every sequence had to be set at 300%, and then offset by a frame, and then spitting out multiple plates. It was a bit of a mad wrangling exercise. And then for blending the exposures, I won't go into this too much because it'll be diving into a new gizmo, but I found a really amazing thing by a guy called Jed Smith, who's done other really good things for the VFX industry, like solving the ACES magenta gamma issues. And yeah, there's this tool which I modified a little bit just for some of our own little things, but it basically analyzes the EXIF data and then picks the good bits from each exposure. And the upshot of that is that if you just take the middle exposure, shadow details are noisy as hell, highlights are totally clipped, it's pretty much unusable for VFX. But by the time we merge the exposures, we get really nice shadow detail and pretty decent highlight detail. I mean, it's definitely not Alexa still, but we're getting the detail we need. So that was that. And then HDRI capture. We had the same sort of set of dilemmas, like how are we going to do this now? This is time-lapse HDR. Do we need to do that the same way? Do we need to use these kind of triggers that it's called an intervalometer that you can kind of attach to your camera? Do we have to switch from using these compact 360 cameras that are kind of super easy to using the old school kind of DSLR and a fisheye, but they only shoot in one direction? Do we have to link it to the primary camera? Or do we just set them off and hope that it all matches up? And it kind of became clear pretty quickly, like we got such tight restrictions on movement once we set off the main camera. How could we possibly operate it without getting in the shot? And also the HDRI capture device is going to be in the shot, whatever you do, so we have to paint it out of every shot. So is it even practical and is it worth it? And from some little tests pre-shoot, it became pretty obvious it wasn't, because you get broadly speaking, everything's the same in that shot apart from a tiny bit of moving stuff in the sky, which ultimately we would be recreating in lighting in Houdini with like gobos and basically custom animated lighting just to match the plate. So that was that. We didn't do time-lapse HDI. And then set capture was sort of the final big challenge of what we had to do, because we're shooting in a jungle. It's not like a studio. It's not a city. It's not all geometric. It's not the kind of place you send a LIDAR scanner to. And at the start of the job, Gaussian splats were just sort of taking off and looking really useful, looking really interesting, real emerging technology. And I thought, well, maybe we can use these somehow. But it was just a bit too early, a bit too soon. And there's the apps that could shoot them, but you couldn't really do anything with them afterwards. They weren't that great quality. And so ultimately, it kind of comes back to good old-fashioned photobombing and photogrammetry. So you just go crazy on a patch of ground. And also when you add in kind of iPad LIDAR into the mix, you kind of have got this best of both worlds, where you've got this thing that comes out of the box from the LIDAR, the iPad LIDAR, more or less with the right scale without you having to measure anything. But it's also, it's terrible quality. It's not really good for a contact surface. But it also has the benefit that you can do it with the camera in shot, so you can capture the camera position, which is a really great reference. And then you do your proper scan, and you get something really, really, really good, surprisingly good, I think, considering what it was. It was forest floor covered in leaves. I just didn't think it would come out quite as well as this, but it did, and it kind of lined up with the LIDAR. And kind of what that meant when you got into Houdini and into shot lighting and effects and setting things up is that you had this really, really good context of where you were in the forest, which always felt like it was never going to happen. You imagine you were going to get some sparse point cloud back from tracking and some slightly ill-fitting modeled surfaces. But this really meant that animators could accurately place the footfall of accurately place the footfall of this tree, and effects elements and interactions could be really, really accurately laid over not only the CG routes but the in-camera routes, and it really kind of made a massive, massive difference on this project. And that segues nicely to Dan.
Cool. So the tree itself was a bit of a beast. It was 1.6 million primitives, because the whole tree, including the leaves, was modeled, and please don't ask me why.
Yeah, I mean, we should address the elephant in the room. The reason it was done that way ultimately was just because of the way the schedule panned out. The job started way before any artists were really on it with the planning stages, and the first people to join the job were kind of traditional asset artists, and so you kind of had to get cracking. And it was also in part because we already reached this point where we decided that this was a creature, and it was going to be rigged like a creature and animated like a creature, and we were going to do the other kind of procedural stuff later. So that's kind of the backstory. But we wouldn't do it again that way.
So obviously, because of that, importing this as just a standard geometry cache is also very heavy. So for this 97 frame cache, we're looking at just over 9 gigs of file size just for that single alembic, which is not fun to work with, really cumbersome, not very interactive. Means you're going to be pre-caching a lot of stuff. So for this job, despite the talk saying, talking about our novel use of USD for importing the stuff, actually, my bad, I forgot that on this job, because it was our sort of Pathfinder job, we didn't actually use USD. We used FBX to bring in the rig and weighted geometry data, and then we used Alembics for the Alembic for the transform data. Yeah, the transform data, the transform cache to apply on it, which obviously is much faster. The FBX import was a bit of an issue. It's very finicky. It would constantly need babysitting, force cooking. You'd come back to something and expect it to cook because you've changed the file path, and it wouldn't, and it wasn't particularly reliable or robust. So that was unfortunate. But once it did cook, once it loaded in the rig, it was very fast to work with. And the FBX file itself would be like 140 megs, and then this same anim cache that I just showed you would be 17, 18 megabytes for the transform cache. So much smaller and faster. Oh, and I forgot to. So that's the kind of speed you get when you're sort of bringing it in, and it's nice because everything's live because it's KineFX and it's awesome. Obviously, we need to now rig this tree that's got all the leaves modeled, all the branches modeled. It needs to have these kind of hanging appendages created for it. So to do that, I started with the fruits stroke nuts. You'll hear me use both terms because on the project it was sort of interchangeable over the course of it. Some people would call them nuts, some people call them fruits. So in order to do that, I extracted the geometry for the hanging fruits that that was going to be populated. Procedurally create the curves that are going to be those branches. Approximate the thickness so that they can collide with each other and with a segment of the trunk, and do a vellum simulation in place just to kind of get the shape for later on, so they can be rigged. The branches, so another quirk of the way this was modeled was that the branches would be a branch and then a segment of trunk that were sort of interlocking. So I had to jump through a few hoops in order to manage that, but actually, in reality, the model didn't change a great deal over the course of the job, whether we weren't adding and removing branches all the time. So it was a bit of an over-engineered solution to something that could have probably been quite a quick manual solve. But had it changed, it would have been very straightforward. So the leaves, I had initially thought that the leaves, we'd be simulating the leaves as vellum cloth. So I did have a sort of remeshed version in my back pocket. But actually, when we started looking at shots and framings and it's looking at it in the context of the film, it seemed like overkill for most cases, and we took the decision that actually it was going to just rendering curves instead, simulating curves rather than full vellum cloth was just more practical, would allow us to iterate faster, and was actually in this instance kind of going to be good enough. So once you have all these different rig elements, you need to sort of tie them all together. you need to derive the sort of hierarchy, and I did that by querying, the root points against nearby primitives and kind of creating a hierarchy attribute, which I could then convert into polylines to kind of stitch it all together. So in a manner that KineFX would accept as a valid rig. Once that's done, obviously, now we're on to the main attraction, which would be simulating the tree. So the decision we took with this was that because you're used to seeing inanimate objects simulated with this kind of the full sort of simulation that matches the movement, we'd simulate that and then sort of dial it back and see, excuse me, what sort of worked, what was, so you could sense it but not necessarily read it directly. So I could choose on a per shot basis what things to simulate. If it's close up of the roots and just the bottom of the trunk, obviously we don't need to simulate the leaves at the top. Not that there was a big overhead or it was particularly slow, but it was just unnecessary. And I can blend in the amount of simulation again on a per shot basis. And then following on that, we would then apply a jitter on top to kind of recreate that sort of time-lapse feel. So it'd be like a hint of secondary sort of sway and wobble, but then with the sort of jitter that you get from the time-lapse applied on top. And I created a preview mode for the jitter so that I could see it quickly, a little more interactively, with the independently of the animation and the simulation. So these are running through the sort of different stages. This is just the pure anim. This is like 100% sim on, and then blend it back 50%, and then the same thing again, but with some jitter. And obviously, because we're applying the jitter and the sim, it's all using, the simulation's done in Vellum, but it's because it's applied back to the rig in KineFX, and this is a rig. Any change in the jitter on the branch is obviously getting propagated down to the leaves, and everything cascades down and affects the kind of child nodes, as you'd expect. So to join the roots to the trunk, we had to create procedural fillets. And these required the UVs and normals, obviously, to blend seamlessly with the trunk. Otherwise, you're going to the jig will be up, and you'll see the kind of intersection, the joining point. And the roots, because they travel, as we mentioned earlier, around the trunk, they sort of come out at the front of the direction of travel and then sort of roll around the trunk backwards. I mean, we never see a full journey because obviously the shots are quite short, but you want the UVs to be able to slide at the join point, but kind of be stuck where the root is coming out. So there was a little bit of UV gymnastics that we had to perform there. But it was, once we kind of figured that out, it was pretty robust. And then when it came to caching everything out, we would take these different elements, cache them out as alembics. Occasionally we do a BGO pre-cache, I should say, just to enable us to accelerate that on the farm. Then write them out as alembics. The branches that are going to have the fruits populating them are generated at this stage, and then we use the points that we've generated from those branches to populate the fruits. They're also cached out here as an alembic, and also the fruit variations that we're going to populate there, they go into it as well. So once we have each of those components out as alembics, we read them back in. Any attributes we need to apply to them, we add at that stage, and then the whole lot is merged together and just written out as a single frame BGO file. It doesn't need to be a sequence, because we can just manipulate the ABC frame attribute on the intrinsic attribute when we read it back in. So it's really just having a container that we can publish, but all the caches live in cache rather than as published assets. It was just more efficient for this job, on this job, to do it that way. And then that would get passed into the look, where it would kind of be loaded in and reconstructed into the tree that you see at the end. So with the roots, we create an aging attribute so that we can we can have an attribute which tells us, if it was derived procedurally. So once if a root was in the ground and popped out of the ground, we knew that it was then going to age faster and die. It was kind of in its dying phase. So the rate at which it aged would sort of increase. And animators could also keyframe particular roots if they wanted to. And then by having that age attribute, we could use that to drive moss growth and other stuff in the shader to affect the look. And here you can see the crazy level of detail that is involved in some of the moss elements. May have gone a little bit too far, but I think it pays off when you see the final result. That extreme detail actually is readable. I think it does elevate the realism of the tree.
I mean, the moss was transformative as a final layer, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was a moment when the moss started to arrive in renders, we were really like, okay, this is we need more of this.
And we should point out it is instanced. It's not like
100%. We're not masochists. Yeah. The same thing with the thorns that I think we mentioned earlier. Their growth and look is driven by this aging attribute, so they only emerge once the age is matured past a certain point. So now we've got the fruit branches, as I mentioned earlier, and the sort of points that were derived from them. We can then live in the look, decide, not that we tweaked this much. Once we'd set the look, it kind of stayed. You can choose the sort of random size distribution, tilt them out and so they're all created on the fly in the look from some of those components that were in the cache. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the advantages of importing your animation as KinFX with weighted geo rather than just like relying on geocaches as we kind of have done up until this point. Excuse me. Here you can see I've brought in Daredevil from our latest Coca-Cola job, which has been exported by our rigging team using the new sort of USD method of loading in the animation. And actually, we didn't use it on that project on Coca-Cola, but it only took them an hour or so to apply that to that rig and get it out. It's something that we can really quickly roll out onto a character if we choose that we need it, and we will do more and more now going forward. So it's a much faster experience. This is coming in with the blend shapes, so there is a little bit of lag because he has a lot of corrected blend shapes which affect large areas of him. So obviously, the more local your blend shapes, the faster they're going to be to apply. So it will be a smoother scrubbing experience. But again, it's much faster than caching this all out as geo. There is a lot of geo in the model that you're not really seeing here. Or if you were to use alembic layering to layer the animation onto the model, again, it's still much slower. And the great thing about that is we can, depending on the task, this is with the blend shapes disabled and just bone deforming. It's super interactive, really fast. No need to like pre-cache stuff for collisions or whatever. You can just keep it all live. And depending on the task, if he was leaving footprints in the snow, I don't need the blend shapes anyway. I can leave it like this, and I'm good to go, much faster. And so the really huge advantage that I found as a sort of benefit of this workflow is that I can create my own pre-roll. I don't, I love animators. We all love animators. I don't love animators who forget to cache the pre-roll as they're walking out the door at 6:30. So to be able to do that myself and not be reliant on somebody, remembering to cache the pre-roll, it's fantastic. And also I can add in, I can tweak it to my needs for the particular shot or the CFX task that I'm doing. So if you were to just pre-roll from the A pose into the first pose, just the geometry cache, obviously the arm would like squidge through the body and come out. It's just like, it'd be a mess, and it actually wouldn't be helpful or usable in any case. So because we're using the rig, it's, it's blending the transforms, it's all rotations, nothing's intersecting, and it's fantastic. So you can see here in the because we're now doing that, I can, I've made this tool for pre-rolling stuff. I can extrapolate the motion so that I can ensure that when the character arrives into the action or the animation start frame, it's got the right velocity. There's no sudden jerk. It's not just immediately starting. It's coming in with the acceleration or velocity that it should have on the start frame. So if you were simulating the hair and it was wafting, as it arrives from the pre-roll, from the rest pose, it's already wafting as it should do to flow into that motion. And for me, that's been great. It's been a fantastic advantage. And also the orientation, you might, for some reason, require the character to be snapped to be world-aligned. I mean, it could be a multitude of different reasons why you might want that. And that's easily done. So also that allows us, I can choose different joints. So here I've selected the head joint, which, if I was to be simulating hair on this character, I'd want to prioritize that to be the smoothest, thing blending in. It'd be my joint of choice, and so I can do that again on a per shot basis, as I say. And the final great advantage is you might not, that A pose that you've got as your rest pose may not be what you need either. So you can also tweak the rest pose that you're using to blend and to pre-roll into your animation. And that again, is something that has come up and will come up again, I'm sure, where that I don't want to have to send something back to animation to fix in their pre-roll and re-export just because actually I needed the arms to be in a T pose, not an A pose. I'm master of my own domain in that regard, and it's really liberating. So yeah, that for me it's been excellent discovery for us, or change in the way we work for speed reasons, file size reasons, efficiency reasons, and flexibility. It's just win-win-win all the way through. It's been great. And on this project, as a sort of pathfinder, it was hugely successful, and allowed us to move and iterate really fast. And that's it.
Very cool. Any questions? Oh, you go first, and then I'll go with you second.
Thanks for the talk, guys. It's awesome. Do you do CFX, like character CFX in Houdini as well, in ETC?
We do, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So you're going to implement some of that pre-roll. It's like, because we tried a bit of automation, just kind of first pass, because you don't need to rely on each individual animator. You can just say, okay, let's try it first on an automation approach. Is that something you're implementing now, like within your pipeline, discovering the KineFX?
Sorry, to automate what? Sorry? Yeah.
So what I think is just saying, do we use it in the CFX pipeline? The answer is we will, and we have been, but it hasn't been, like you were saying, on this project, it wasn't exclusively used. It was kind of pathfinding for it, but it's kind of becoming a standard thing, right?
I think now it's the sort of preferred way. And, the thing that enables us to do that is that our rigging team try as much as possible to limit everything to skin weights and blend shapes, so there are no surprise deformers that, obviously, once you use those, you then have to interpret those deformations as blend shapes in order for it to come through this way, because if you have an arbitrary deformer, it's... so yeah, there's a few little snags, but yeah, it's something that I think we're just going to use for everything now.
That's really cool. I have more questions about it. I'll leave it.
The bar later, yeah.
Catch you after.
Hi. I was wondering about the lighting and rendering of the sequence. Did you guys primarily use your own custom lighting for the scene? So because it's a lapse video, did you have to go in frame by frame and try and match everything?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that part of the early presentation was quite brief and was covering the fact that we basically thought we might have to do really, really on time HDR capture that aligned with the primary photography capture, but it sort of transpired that it was never going to work. It was never going to be practical, and it wasn't really going to deliver the benefit of all that hassle and work. And so, like I said, we effectively, for each setup, which, like I said, took anything from like 45 minutes to an hour for a single pass. We did a standard set of HDR and lighting references at the beginning. We did a standard set at the end. We had both of those in the pipe the normal way, like you would for any lighting shot. But all the in-between stuff was, like you're suggesting, custom animation, where people, used actual, physical lights, virtual physical lights in Houdini and gobos, and animated the gobos, and essentially did it not frame by frame, probably, but because it depended on the shot, and some shots really were not direct lighting; they kind of were ambient boil, whereas some shots had actual kind of a bit where it was all kind of overcast, and then a bit where lighting kind of flickered across it, and then it changed again. And yeah, we had to match all that stuff, but yeah, by hand.
And did you push it further in comp with different lighting passes? Did you still have control in comp running all those passes?
Yeah, I mean, there was sort of, in some cases, I think particularly on some of the turtle shots, I think the one where it's looking down over the turtle across to the tree, there was bits where we did passes just to add highlights and glistening bits, and they were selectively patched in comp, just where it looked nice, and because it was chaotic, lighting, it was quite forgiving. You could kind of just do something that you didn't have to be too careful about, is it right? Because on the next frame it's gone and the next thing's there. So it's it was forgiving and kind of fun and creative.
Thank you.
I've just thought of something else I didn't mention actually, is that with our new, part of the reason why it's taken us so long to go from this first implementation, which is a year ago when we did this, or getting on for, to the USD one, is that we've done it in a way that is giving us a foot up to when we go into Solaris and to USD. Obviously, we're using that as a vehicle to get back into SOPs, but when we work in USD now going forwards, a lot of our tooling that's involved in making this work allows us to just to stay in Solaris. So we're able to pull it into SOPs as we are here, but we can also stay in Solaris going forward, and have characters come in ready to go.
I love how maybe a year or two ago, presentations would be about Solaris and USD, and now it's just part of workflow, which is great to see.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts, feelings, dreams?
I feel it'd be remiss of us not to name drop Christian, who sat there in the third row.
Yeah.
Who also worked on the project.
Yeah. Epic effort on the project, yeah.
Very cool. Thanks, guys. Very good. Thank you.
Thanks.